Firstly, thank you, Ali, for organizing this. Very excited for the next hour. For everyone who's joined, our topic is climate tech, the need of the hour. I'm going to split this into two parts. The first is going to take about 40 minutes, and we're going to, kind of extract Dr. Abrar and Dawar's experience out of them. And I'm going to split that bit into 5 sets of questions for each of them. But I kind of, before really diving in, I think it's important for the audience to kind of know who the people are. So I'll give a quick intro for both of them. Dr. Abrar is, amongst many things, also my teacher from Oxford. He's a PhD in environmental change and management. He also has an MSc in environmental management and an MBA, all three from the University of Oxford. He's a chartered accountant. He's the managing partner of Crowe Pakistan, which is one of the largest audit and consulting companies in the world. He has over 25 years of experience advising governments, banks, multilaterals, research organizations, and he's a research fellow as well as an award-winning doctoral researcher recognized by the Academy of Management. So that's that for Dr. Abrar. Dawar, who's my partner in the Climate Finance Pakistan gig that we run. He's a GRI-certified professional. He's currently the lead of Climate and Sustainability Services at CFP. He's been working on a number of a number of diverse initiatives. As part of that, he's co-authored the Transparency Governance Report on Pakistan, as well as the Corporate Reporting Assessment that was launched in 2024. He's done a number of innovation advisory projects. He's worked for entities like the World Bank Group, Adam Smith, OPM, Sustainable World Inc., and he's currently embedded in the UAE and has a very strong foothold in Pakistan. So I think both extremely overly qualified individuals who have a very strong passion for Pakistan and its ecosystem and are doing a lot to make a positive change. With that, Mebis, I'm just going to jump into the questions. And the first part of that is going to be kind of setting the scene. So Dr. Abrar, I'm going to come to you first every single time, and hopefully we can take from there. So the first question, very baseline, is how do you really define climate tech, and what do you see as the systematic barriers currently that hinder the growth of it in Pakistan's context?
So thank you so much, Mekaeel, and thank you for organizing this session. I think it's a really important topic that we should be talking about. So when we talk about climate tech, really it's a very broad definition, right? There isn't like a single thing that what climate tech is, but if I was to define it, I would talk about climate tech as innovations. And when I say innovations, I mean, the hard part, the hardware, the software, the services that are really needed to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. And so that's the broad definition, because often when we talk about climate tech, we're thinking about just technology, but I wanted to make sure that it's more encompassing, right? There are many facets to climate tech. But I wanted to actually pick on your question on the systemic challenges, right? And, we can start with all the standard challenges, which is, there's obviously policy fragmentation, we have financing gap, we have, lack of data, there are lots of regulatory hurdles. And those are, to be honest, pretty similar across many geographies. So it's not unique to Pakistan. Many countries have similar problems. But I'd love to go a bit deeper into, what are the challenges? What are some of the barriers that we're seeing, and why certain technologies are also thriving within this ecosystem space? And when we look at climate tech, of course, there are two sides of it, right? One, as I said, mitigation. And mitigation is really about, reducing emissions. And if I was to use that example of innovation, let's take solar as an example, right? With solar, you of course have solar panels. So that's really the hardware that's being brought in. But then we also need data to understand, how these solar panels are operating, what information, what data is coming in. And that's really the software side of it, that we need that data as well. But then there are also services that are required to install those solar panels, right? And often we don't think of them as climate tech part of it. But combined, all these elements become really important. But also, what's very fascinating when I was, doing some research, looking at some of these challenges, it's fascinating that when we look at Pakistan, right, and we look at the Pakistan climate tech space, one thing that really stands out that, in the last 2 years, Pakistan has become the largest importer for solar panels. I think 2025, it's expected that, Pakistan will import almost 2 gigawatts of solar and
Yeah.
become the third largest importer. And when you think about that space, you wonder, okay, what's happening here? Despite all the policy barriers, the hurdles, the data deficits, how is that Pakistan was, leading in this space? And then when you unpack that, you realize actually it's not driven just by climate. What what is driven by is that it's actually solving another problem. When we look at the Pakistani grid, for example, it's inefficient, right? There's lots of losses. People are getting solar not just from a climate perspective, but they're getting solar because they want energy access. And then finally, they're getting solar because it's more viable for them. It's cheaper. So when you combine these three elements together, right? Pricing, a problem that's being solved, suddenly you have uptake. And that's
Yeah.
why we're seeing a huge uptake of solar, not driven by climate. But that's where, and as a comparable example, when you look at EV, electric vehicles, why is there not an uptake? Because it's not really solving a problem that Pakistan has. We already have
Yeah.
lots of, right? We don't have the infrastructure. Although it might be environmentally very friendly, no one is really buying EV because it doesn't solve any problem. And I think that's where the exciting opportunity starts to come in. That look, we have an infrastructure that's being built up. How do we build climate tech solutions on top of that? So imagine 2 gigawatts of energy being imported, right? What are the solutions that we can create on top of that?
Yeah.
Because we can see a market emerging. And then maybe I'll make one quick final point here that while that's fine, right? We're seeing energy access, we're seeing energy solutions coming in, but that's not really solving the climate problem. It's solving the energy problem for Pakistan, right? No one is really paying attention to the emissions that are not being being reduced through the solar panel. I think our biggest challenge is on the adaptation side of it. I think that's where Pakistan needs a lot of climate solution, and that's where a lot of systemic barriers are. Because when you look at adaptation, you know, globally, not just Pakistan, only 10% of the funding goes to adaptation. And the reason is that there isn't a market available, right?
Yeah.
Adaptation has been recognized as something that's tangible. We all have a different definition of adaptation. When you look at adaptation, we're talking about livelihoods, we're talking about agriculture, we're talking about health. When we talk about mitigation, we're really talking about, carbon pricing or energy pricing. So there's a clear metric there. But I think with adaptation, we don't really have a market. And I think for us, it's not the policy gaps, it's not the financing gap. It's really spending time articulating what the problem is. Once we understand the problem that we're solving, then we can build solutions. And climate tech comes on top of it. Like climate tech is not the answer, right?
Yeah.
It's not the solution. What we need to understand, what's the problem that climate tech is solving?
And I thank you, very, very thorough. And I love that you actually pointed towards the adaptation side of things, which is the actual element that Pakistan needs to, kind of focus on. Dawar, kind of leading on from where Dr. Abrar left, in terms of climate risks, what do you see as the most urgent? And where do you see tech intervention coming in, solving those problems in the most impactful way?
Thank you, Mekaeel. I think I'll actually take on Dr. Abrar's lead because this is a conversation I think we've had informally. I was also talking to this colleague of mine who has gone on to serve in the WTO now in Geneva. And he was constantly, pitching this idea that Pakistan has a trade deficit, we import so much of energy, and how do we really get out of this? And from my perspective, I have had a very small comment on it that each of Pakistan's crises, at least in my lifetime, I wouldn't comment on previous generations. My lifetime, I've seen an energy crisis in 2008, 9, 10. I've seen a crisis again because of petroleum prices in 2014. I've seen a crisis again post-COVID in the commodity super cycle. And all of these have been, in a way, linked to our, connection with oil imports. Now, given, all of this picture aside, with the solar coming in and with other technologies such as, your off-grid mini grids popping up, which, by the way, when we count the net metering and everything, we're not counting all the off-grid rural mini grids that are popping up in Pakistan. And at the same time, the transition that is happening to efficient technologies, and that will happen through other renewable energy coming in, we will see that Pakistan's connection to oil will gradually keep on reducing. And the risk associated with these downturns, with commodity super cycles and all of that, will also get out of the picture. So, in a way, a lot of us should be bullish on Pakistan because this desperate need for imported energy is going to gradually go away. We're going to be connected to renewables, wind, possibly biomass, biogas, all of these different, which are all locally available, all locally sourced. So you're going to be saving dollars. And this is where I think the solutions are popping up already. We're seeing, people coming up with biogas, biomass, already half of the industry. If you go to any textile mill, they'll have 3 boilers on biomass and 3 might be running on, imported gas or furnace oil. We're already seeing that transition happening. Similarly, for households, that's happening. There was this recent statistic that if you get a 17 kVA system in a country like Pakistan, you can run at least 1 kVA worth of energy appliances throughout the day, at night as well, because your battery storage is going to be capable enough of generating as well as supplying the energy and then storing for nighttime use as well. So your big, the rich households are already solved their problem. Now it's going to, come down to your lower middle income, lower middle class as well. But then all the other risks that are popping up now, and this is going to be a business case for resolving those risks as well. So adaptation, number one. What has happened in cities like Islamabad, Lahore, and even Karachi? Islamabad, very recently we've had the hailstorms. So this never happens so frequently for a place like Islamabad, but it's now going to be a norm in the entire Potowar belt. And we have to adapt to living with the indication that these really damaging infrastructure, damaging hailstorms are going to come. What are the infrastructure they're damaging? Cars, solar panels, all of that. So this is a place where fintech will see an opportunity to come and provide insurance products that are going to help people become more resilient. So I don't see this only as a place where climate tech or climate enterprises will resolve it. You will have fintech coming in. You will have other already, for example, housing. Now, this is a very clear case that Pakistan, the way that we build houses, the materials that we use, extremely inefficient. What will be the type of materials that we develop? For example, infrastructure technologies is going to be something that I see popping up, both making sure that your houses are better insulated against both cold and heat. And then your, glass and everything, all of this is going to come in. So there's a bunch of areas where I see a lot of enterprises popping up. I will, like Dr. Abrar, I do not see that climate tech is the way I call them, climate, which is a climate enterprises, which are going to keep on coming. A lot of these challenges are going to keep on coming. We're going to keep on thinking of solutions to resolve it. I see this happening with agriculture again. A lot of this will happen with transportation. A lot of this will happen with the way we build roads will change. So there's a lot of opportunities for materials enterprises, for chemicals, for again, as I mentioned, your energy already is coming into play. But all these other, because of these risks popping up, these businesses have opportunity. So people do have ideas, I do think, but I also at the same time see that scaling up, particularly for adaptation related interventions and businesses, making the business case is a little difficult at this point. But give it 5 more years, and everyone will want that code. For example, no one during when COVID was happening, no one really cared what solar is, and in 2025, everyone wants to have solar. So this is the transition we're talking about. Within 5 years, these changes happen. Same thing happened with CNG when it came. No one really bothered in the initial few years in 2005. And quickly by 2011, there was so much uptake that we had to slow down the process. That's already happening with net metering right now. So same will happen with these technologies. The demand for better materials is going to skyrocket. Everyone will want that because also the cost differentials will end. One example of this is happening in Lahore right now, where the Ravi River's riverbed is usually mined to make these bricks, the clay bricks that we use, and also for the house foundations. But now, because of the brick kiln, producing the brick cost has gone so high because of importing zigzag blowers and building that technology. The concrete brick is now costing the same. So a lot of houses will buy that rather than wait for the clay brick, which also breaks during transportation. Similarly, you will have people using waste or construction waste, infrastructure waste to repackage them as reusable bricks because it's going to cost the same. So I think these opportunities are coming up, and as we keep on going, understanding our environment better, you will keep on hearing more businesses coming in to resolve them.
Chalo, I'm glad you kind of expanded the lens from tech to entrepreneurship because I'm seeing questions along the lines as well. So hopefully you've kind of dabbed on some of the things that people are asking. Because I split this into a few sections, so I'm going to go more academic into the context now. So Dr. Abrar, in terms of research, academic capacity, the startup ecosystem, how conducive do you see the space to be for climate tech or climate enterprise to develop locally within Pakistan?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we have lots of promising universities. It's not that the infrastructure is not available. There are many universities. We have a young population. Of course, our education level has been growing rapidly as well. But again, I'll come back to the key point, right? I think it's really important that our efforts have to be aligned. I think what I see right now in local institution is there's lots of fragmentation, lots of people doing many, 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 many things. And what that does is what we're hoping for is that, if I'm a startup, if I'm a researcher, what I'm hoping for is, okay, my idea will become the big unicorn, right? And those are very difficult pathways. I think what we require internally, and that's for all institutions, is to really identify a 3 or 4 key problems. Like, what are those key challenges? We can't solve the entire climate challenge together. So what is it that we want to focus on, right? And if I go back, and these are suggestions, I can expand to it in later questions as well. But for me, it's, look, let's pick an example of flooding, right? We know that Pakistan is prone to climate floods. We're now seeing, and we also know that we're seeing these floods all across the world, right? Texas, sadly, floods happen. We know that a country that has such a huge capacity, resources, was also not prepared. So we know that these events will continue to happen, right? But this has been happening historically in Pakistan for a long time. What have we learned from it, right? And for me, that's the key question. And what can the world learn from us? And I think that's where universities, research institutions play a critical role. That, look, we are ground zero for many of those activities, for many of sadly, the disasters. But it's through these disasters, through these constraints, through these challenges that innovative solutions come out, right? We experience those solutions. And I think that's where research institutions have a critical role to play. Look, let's pick up Pakistan's key challenges. Flood is a big challenge. Who in Pakistan is teaching on flood management? We have business schools. How are business schools creating the right institution and organization that can think of long-term challenges, right?
Yeah.
Who's building resilient organizations, right? So it's a role for business schools. It's the role for thematic institution like, the agriculture university or, engineering university that think about, okay, how do we create these robust materials that can withstand? It's the role for climate schools to come and think about, okay, what science is coming out to it. So I think the world can actually learn from us rather than us waiting that there is some science or there's someone out there who's paying attention and he'll bring solutions to Pakistan. No, it has to be done internally. And on that very note, look, I'll give you an example. I built a small program, which is this Pakistan Oxford Climate Workshop. And the idea there was simple. It was like, how do we link researchers in Pakistan who are extremely talented, right?
Yeah.
Who have the data, with researchers that are based in Oxford that have a different talent.
Yeah.
Their talent is probably articulation, publication. But we also know that right now we are in a world where data is key. Who owns that data? Pakistan owns that data, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where those impacts are happening. When I talk to researchers, all they ask me, how can we go to a case study? Where can we go to study this? So for me, it's about those linkages. It's about demonstrating to the world that, look, we are equal, right? We bring the data, we bring the local knowledge, we bring the local solutions. You give us your way of thinking, the way if I'm sitting in Oxford, it's a 1,000-year institution. Of course, it has an advantage because it has that network, but it has an advantage in thinking, but it doesn't always have an advantage in data. So for me, this is where we have to be proactive at a university level and say, look, these are the capabilities we have. These are the 3 problems, the 5 problems that we as a nation are going to be working on. These are the capabilities that are missing. When I'm very explicit, I can have very, very relevant partnerships. So flood management, right? We can develop those solutions. Look at Netherlands, for example. Why is it the most productive food producing company? Because they have a lack of land. So they started to optimize their land. So their solution originated from the problem they were solving. So I think we need to think as researchers, we should step away from our solutions. I would say put them in our pockets for a little while and spend 90% of our time articulating the problem. Once we understand what problems we're solving, believe me, the climate tech is, along with many other things, are solutions that are there. We just have to bring them in, and we will be able to solve this. So for me, that's the bridge we need to make.
No, of course, and I think the academia in Pakistan, at least to my mind, has the same problem as the government of Pakistan. They operate in so many silos and don't talk to each other for God knows what reason. And it's always been the case, and it consistently seems to be the same. But on that, given that Dawar is privileged and living in Dubai and working on Pakistan's climate ecosystem, what are the kind of entrepreneurial tech solutions you've seen in the region that you feel that can really be applied or expanded within Pakistan?
So I'll tell you one of the interesting case studies here, for example, because this is a fossil fuel country producing country, they've capped the amount of solar you can install. So like Pakistan, you can apply, build have a solar system on your house, apply for a net metering connection. You cannot do that in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. As a matter of fact, you cannot do it in any of the Emirates. And to reduce energy, construction company like Imar cannot simply say that we'll have solar panels cover our entire building and will generate electricity that way. Simply does not work that way because that will create the capacity problem for all of UAE then. So the way they save energy then is having energy efficient technologies throughout the structure. This will be anything from central air conditioning to having, simply having every electricity producing outlet be timed, that at a certain time it will stop working. At the same time, you'll have these very, very massive real-time software that will be tracking everything from air inflow, air temperature, to energy use, to what is a particular resident doing in a particular apartment. So you have all of these regulatory tech that has come in. And that's really massively popping. So the Dubai Supreme Council of Energy will outsource this to an entrepreneur, which will do all of this mapping technology and trap the energy for one building, then scale it up to a whole community, then eventually scale it up to a city. So one side is that this is very advanced regulatory tech coming in, basically to make sure that they have the numbers, they have the data, and then they can act on that data. Number two is all the fancy things that are coming in, that are carbon capture and storage, then green hydrogen, because they have very massive enterprises working in aluminum, steel, fertilizer, rack, ceramics, for example, is the biggest exporter of ceramics now in the world. So all of these are very, very big emitters. And these are out of oil and gas. These are very hard to abate sectors. So they're creating these opportunities for offset generation within the country. And that is where, again, a lot of big uptake is happening. But then there are very, very small businesses as well. And I was seeing this in the chat. Now, circular economy is a very, very big business case for these guys because they import everything from food, to packaging, to the type of even the chefs that are going to make the food are imported over here. So number one, saving food is a high priority. So and how they do it is that they have an initiative called NEMA. So it's for what we call NEMA in Arabic. It's called NEMA, and they have a program that was implemented since 2021. And in the recent updates, they've saved 3 million tons of food. And what they've been doing is basically going to these staff accommodations, to universities, and at each of the cafeterias, simply have a digital screen which is showing them the type of food that a person might be doing, type of food waste that a person might be doing. So a lot of the enterprises that import and sell food, they're saving money this way. And how did it happen? There was again, a technology to trap food consumption over a period of a year, come up with the average consumption, and then put in an intervention that started to reduce it. And also to measure this is going to be something that software is going to come to. So we have a lot of these niche softwares that are popping up, doing a lot of these calculations. But when you're not importing food, when you're saving food, you're basically saving emissions as well. Because if your food is going to be imported from Indonesia, coming all the way here, or Philippines, that containers emissions is being saved and offset. So this is how they're going about it. They know that they have their own limitations. They want to, and their problems are limited, but they still want to save money, be more efficient. They have a very, very, I would say, ambitious NDC, which for the audience, I'll just put in here that NDC is a commitment that your government makes to the international community under the UNFCCC framework, that our country is going to reduce this much emission. And right now, Brazil and UAE are one of the few countries which have developed their NDC. Pakistan's last NDC was in 2021. We're in the process of making it. And the biggest reduction in emissions UAE is targeting is from the built environment. So they say by 2035, they'll reduce 75% of these emissions from their entire built environment, which will, and of course, this is the biggest sector they are currently expanding as well. So it takes a lot of effort to know that this is a sector that is driving your economy, but also imposing these restrictive measures on them. But all the companies here are very innovative. So they're constantly thinking of ways to actually comply. So this is where we're thinking a lot of the business cases coming up. And that's what I'm seeing over here.
Okay, thank you. It was very in detail, and I hope a lot of the people on chat could get some ideas. थोड़ा सा pivot करते हैं into everyone's favorite topic, the money. Where's the financing? Where's the deployment? So in terms of firstly again, Dr. Abrar, I think firstly the बहुत baseline. Let's explain the concept of blended finance in this context, and how do you see blended finance and the multilateral funds playing a role in uplifting the ecosystem in Pakistan?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the definition and then I'll go backwards to explain, what do we actually mean and how do we apply this. So look, blended finance is it's not a simple approach. Like the concept is quite simple. It's more difficult to execute, but really the idea is, you are funding an intervention, right? And I'll go back to the example of, let's say, adaptation, right? Adaptation has been quite hard to fund. So from a simple perspective, if I go to a private sector and say, look, can you, from kind of Dawar's example, can you start to fund on food waste? So they'll think about it like, what's the benefit? Like, what's the value that I'm going to get? What's the profitability that will come out of it? And often those business cases are not very clear. So what the perception for private sector is, look, the risk is very high, the reward is very low. Right. So it doesn't add up and they're not willing to actually get into because they have better opportunities. And simply, if I look at Pakistan, maybe the interest rate is very high. So they'll say, you know what, why don't I put in government bonds? I can get 10% and you're offering me a project that's offering, 5%. Why should I invest in that? So they'll walk away. But what they're not thinking about, and because it's never been in their purview, is that there is other elements of impact that are not being captured, right? That financial instruments or financial profitability does not capture, which means, the food waste that's going in, right? What's the health implications on that? What happened to the soil that we use to produce it? So there's so much that goes beyond the organizational boundary. So blended finance is a way where, a government or a multilateral fund or other funds that have a lot of focus on impact but don't have a lot of money will come and say, look, what I'll do is I'll put in $100, you know, I'll take a return of 3%, private sector, why don't you put in $100 as well? You get a higher return because I will give up my return and I'll give it to you. And the reason is because I focus a lot more on the impact side of it, right? So there are lots of these new instruments that are coming in, and what it's allowing us to do is their basic purpose is how do we catalyze funding, right? We know that public funds are limited, right? We know that Pakistan doesn't have a lot of development funds. We know that grants and what we call unconditional money is very limited, right? We know that USAID, for example, has stopped working. So many of these development organizations are now stopping. So how do we continue? And the idea is that we use whatever public money or low capital money we have and we mix it, we blend it with private capital so that the returns are feasible for both. And that's opened up a lot of new capital. We're at the initial stages. For example, Green Climate Fund does a lot of this blended capital. Pakistan has been successful recently in two projects. I think, one was by NRSP, one was by Acumen, where they are blending. They'll give their cheaper money, and then you have to go to private sector. It's still a struggle, right? Even if you have cheap money, it's still a struggle. And I'll go back. I think this is, Michaela, I want to spend like maybe 2 minutes on this, because I think it's a really important element that we need to understand that, look, we need funding, we need financing, but financing is not the answer. Financing does not unlock the solutions.
Yeah.
Because again, I'll go back to say, look, when the reason solar is massively scaling is because it's solving a problem. Suddenly, private capital is coming in. Suddenly, my personal money is coming in. We are spending our own money to put solar panels because it's solving a problem. It's the market is there, the solution is there, the price mechanism is there. Everything has been established, but it wasn't established today. In 2025, Pakistan is importing solar. 10 years ago or 5 years ago, this solar was maybe 10 times more. In 2014, if you wanted to put a solar panel in your home for your entire solar, that was $70,000 to $80,000.
Yeah.
That was the cost. And the reason why that cost has come down, because there was finance, subsidized finance that went in. Governments pledged money in this. China invested money in this. There were, net metering schemes. There was roof metering schemes that was giving subsidy to make this technology thrive. So the push was coming from supply side. It wasn't coming from demand. We still wanted energy, but the push was coming from the market, from innovation, from solar manufacturer, from governments. We are now in the same dilemma for adaptation. Like when we talk about adaptation, when I talk about floods, when I talk about livelihoods, when I talk about agriculture, food improvement, we all understand. Like if I go to a business right now and say, look, you have to work on climate adaptation, they say, okay, I know I need to because I need to take care of my population. Everyone has that empathy. They don't understand how, because we don't have the products. We don't have solar, the way solar is in mitigation and energy, a product that's in adaptation clearly, because we're still like many years behind. So people are like, okay, give me a solution. Like, what's the solution? Because I don't even know what my problem is, right? So the market hasn't created, demand supply is not matching. When that happens, the innovation has to come from supply side. That means we can't expect people, we can't go to business and say, look, this is your problem, you solve it. We need innovation. This is where governments come in. This is where climate blended finance comes in. This is where R&D comes in. This is where universities comes in. So there's a whole climate stack. And we've seen this evolution happen in technology. In tech, you get R&D, you develop something. You get seed, you get round, whatever, A round, B, C, because there's an evolution. So I think what we require really to solve the climate problem in Pakistan is really spend time on adaptation. And there we have to spend a lot of time on the measurement side of it, because we don't have the metrics, we don't have the softwares. And I think that's what, Mekaeel, all of you are developing, are the softwares to capture that, because once we can show the data, then we can start to get investment. Right now, a lot of this conversation is theoretical. So we need supply side innovation, we need R&D, we need universities, we need all of that alignment to happen. And we will have a market very soon for adaptation, which will solve for many of those problems in the same way we solved for the solar problem or the energy problem.
And that was very in depth, and I think it answered a lot of questions in the chat because I was just going through what to select. I think thank you for that. I think it's very that answers a lot of questions that people have asked me over the last few weeks as well. Dawar, because we're a little short on time, I'm going to kind of club some of the questions together and make a larger question for you. So I think two parts to my question. The first part is, in your experience, in terms of you've been looking at a number of startups, and as Investable, what are some of the top stories or some of the top sectors that you think are attractive for Pakistanis or FDI to come in to the Pakistani ecosystem? And how do you kind of link that with the new requirements with the SCCP is bringing in?
Okay, so I think beside the SCCP, I think green banking guidelines are a very important document for people who follow our industry. But to possibly sum it up together, adaptation is a very important need of the country, and one while I agree with Dr. Abrar. I think the business for adaptation is something what our risk environment will limit a lot of the business opportunities. So we will keep on seeing businesses coming into the mitigation side of things, and this will be a noticeable thing that if we try to bring together all the enterprises. I think we did some estimate of prominent enterprises in Pakistan, and we came up with the number 93, that these are 93 climate enterprises which have a substantial business related to the field of climate, are operational. And within them, nearly 50% were dealing with the energy component. And of course, the energy side was primarily saving your grid electricity through solar or energy efficiency, or through your electric vehicles, saving your fuels. So at least 50% were already dealing with the mitigation side. There was one or two which were dealing with waste in a way that can be categorized as mitigation and adaptation both. There was a construction sector one, only one, which can be categorized as adaptation. The rest of them were all looking into mitigation. So while I say this is not to discourage anyone from working on adaptation projects or similar lens for their business. Usually what we see is that the overall macroeconomic environment is set in a way that certain businesses can succeed immediately, which is a lot of entrepreneurs in Pakistan want this. Again, the idea that I want to be the unicorn suddenly. While adaptation is a very slow process, it will take some time. Projects are very diverse, require credit guarantees, require calculating a believable economic rate of return rather than just a financial rate of return. So this becomes a very complicated subject, which, by the way, now organizations like World Bank, its private sector arm, IFC, they understand this. So they will be willing to work along with big entities and come up with an adaptation project. But at the same time, your venture capital firms, making them understand this is difficult. Over here, for example, it would be very rare for something like Mubadala to go into and directly invest in a very big ambitious adaptation project. They would look for both things, having a mitigation component and adaptation. But then there's the Altera fund that has been set up as a climate fund. So that will possibly invest more in adaptation. From Pakistan's lens, if you look at the federal budget and how it has evolved, it's around 700 million that is going into mitigation and adaptation now. It used to be 200 million around 10 years back. But 10 years back, 50% of the component went to adaptation and 50% went to mitigation. Now, nearly 90% is going to mitigation and only 10% is going to adaptation. And the types of project are very, you would say that adaptation project government wing is having a flood mitigation wall, or going to the hill torrent side where flooding happens, building dams over there. So that's the adaptation that the government is doing. But then the private sector can do a couple of things here as well. I think one of the things that we again have to be cognizant of is that our weather is getting very extreme. So different sorts of products which make sure that we adapt and mitigate both of these outcomes. So adaptation would be making sure you have green spaces, making sure that you have green infrastructure. How can that green infrastructure be made profitable? In many cases, there will be very, very slow returns on it. So you need a guarantee on it. It could be simply an open park, but can you make sure that the park is green enough? Can you charge enough? If you have open land somewhere, can you utilize it for that purpose? So a lot of these things can happen. I've been constantly getting these queries from industrialists in Kurangi. So now, if anyone who has been to Kurangi, they know that there's not a lot of open space, but there are open spaces, big open spaces like roundabouts and empty spaces that are just dirt, soil dirt. And they keep on coming back to me, can we club together all our land and put a afforestation project on this land? But again, they're not a single legal entity, so they cannot put a afforestation project that can generate offsets and sell to them. But at the same time, a lot of that area can be utilized for public, as a public park, but at the same time, making sure that it has enough return coming in that is both cooling the environment around Kurangi, which is again a need of that area, but also all being used by the public as a green space. At the same time, how do you measure all of this progress? And this is where I think the discussion was going to the software. Now, what we're doing with CarbonTrack has been this, that making sure that we study the value chain of a particular product or an organization, understand where and why certain things are happening, then theoretically at least quantifying it, because of course you cannot put some sort of monitor on an outlet and say that these are your carbon emissions. That it simply does not work that way. But coming up with a believable number and making sure that it's verified, then you can talk about all of this. I would say to industrialists in Kurangi that you can do all of this, you can generate offsets, but how do you make people understand that you doing this is benefiting them as well? How do you make a bank understand that your offset is going to give a certain value that you can return to the bank in the future and for now get debt in return for the project that you're trying to deploy? So that has to happen. This is what we're doing with CarbonTrack. We're trying to measure those emissions or those offsets that can possibly happen, present, a very thorough transition strategy to a particular firm that, okay, this is the strategy that you implement incrementally every year, and you will be able to reduce your carbon emissions, or you can bring an offset project. So a lot of this is happening on ground. It will take time to scale up. For solar, for example, you don't have one single entity becoming the unicorn doing all of it. So I expect that you'll have hundreds of entities doing this, serving from very small industrial zones to serving the federal government in a way. So different scales of the types of entities that operate. And you won't have a unicorn in this line of business because climate simply does not work that way, that one solution can fix all of this, but you'll have multiple solutions. You possibly have future holding companies that just do this line of business. We have examples of this in the US. We have examples of this in Europe. A lot of companies which, when they see certain products making sense, they start consolidating. So that has happened. For example, Sustainalytics started off very small, but it has consolidated into this massive analytics firm now, which has data on everything from carbon markets to very small entities operating anywhere from Canada to Singapore. So this happens eventually, and you will have these big holding centralized companies coming up. In Pakistan's case, it won't happen like unicorn, but it's still very profitable down the lane anyway.
Thank you, Dawar. Very, very thorough again. Ajay, I'm going to kind of close the questions I had because I think we're running slightly over the allotted time. So I'm going to jump into the questions that Ali's kindly put in the chat, and I'm going to be clubbing a few questions so we can maximize the number of queries that we have. Jumping to Dr. Abrar first. So I think मैं दो तीन सवालों को club कर रहा हूँ, तो bear with me. What is your advice if you were to be in government to make the Pakistani ecosystem more attractive? How would you make the policy sphere more proactive as opposed to the reactive system that operates right now? And what are the kind of incentives that you think are needed? I know it's a very broad question, but as small as you can make it.
No, absolutely. So if I was in government or if I was a policymaker, I would be very strategic, right? I would start simply from picking Pakistan's top three exports. And I would say, look, what does this country do? What is it doing right now? Because we have a baseline, right? Start with textile. What's the next one? It could be agriculture or food, milk. I would start with those supply chains because that's already generating exports, right? And for me, the 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 approach would be right now, how do I connect this entire value chain? Because why is Pakistan well, it's actually a declining textile producer, but that is our biggest export, right? So if I take that example, what policies, what financing, what mechanisms can I create that looks at the entire value chain, right? So what's happening right now? Taking the example, we have some amazing textile companies that operate, right? But they're working vertically. So they can produce cotton and they can export. But that benefit is not spreading to that entire industry, right? So it's not that it's not happening. Now the question is, how do I, for example, if I look at Pakistan's cotton production, right? It's fallen by 50%. We are now importing cotton. So what advantage that Pakistan has, right? Very soon we'll be like Bangladesh, we're importing products. So if we think from a buyer's perspective, a buyer wants transparency. It wants traceability. It wants to know exactly where the product is coming from. It wants its emissions to be measured. If I take that lens, then I would set up a policy. Actually, I think there was a question there. I would set up a private-public partnership entity that would have a single, I would call it the Pakistan Transformation Agency, right? Because its role would be, how can I transform the country? How can I innovate the country without doing anything new? How do I connect all those dots? How do I connect the farmers to the textile manufacturers? How do I go and talk to climate finance? In fact, I would set up my own climate fund as a start. I would pool in money from all these different funders and say, you know what, I am going to invest in my supply chain from cotton textile and I will grow this industry 5 times because I'm going to produce like the lowest traceable emission product that has a buyer sitting there. If I link all of these things with trade, then you have climate tech solutions coming in because there's so many spaces where climate tech can come in. There's so many spaces where VCs, investors can come in because I can show them a clear pathway. This is how you will make money if you invest in cotton supply. This will be transformed into a product that will be sold, hopefully at a premium because I'm solving someone else's problem. So for me, that's the approach. Let's not do like random fragmented throwing things here where we want EV. No, let's link our climate strategy with our trade and let's use the base we already have. Let's not try to create a new product that doesn't exist right now and spend 5, 10 years trying to solve a problem that no one wants. Let's solve a problem that we have access to and let's our policy, our finance, our taxation aligned to that. And I think and there are examples. I'm not making this up. You can look at Ethiopia, you can look at many other countries who've actually looked at these things and looked at their country and actually have had tangible impact on their GDP by just connecting the dots. And that's what I would do. That's the agency and that's the policies that I would create. And I would do it for the three exports.
No, fair. I think it's brilliant, right? Such a simple baseline. उसका data भी available है. वो heavy developed sector. You have entrepreneurs who are of decent metal, who listen, understand, and who make the interventions as well. So I think fully on point. I don't understand कि हम random interventions क्यों करते रहते हैं जिनका कुछ होता नहीं है. फिर अगला बंदा आता है वो समझता है वो ज़्यादा smart है वो अपनी एक नई चीज शुरू कर देता है. This just moving on from that, Dawar, I think we're बहुत ज़्यादा questions हैं कि investors को कैसे संभालना है, कैपिटल कैसे रेज करना है. ऑब्वियसली डॉलराइज्ड रिटर्न का इशू है, डी रिस्किंग का इशू है, पाकिस्तान की लो रिटर्न्स का इशू है, और ब्लेंडेड फाइनेंस की हम पहले से बात कर चुके हैं. तो is there a good Pakistani story you can talk about? You thought this was a good success, or you think of this to be a good success in the future, inshallah. And what are the kind of guardrails you would keep if you were trying to fundraise for your startup?
Okay, so I think a lot of people might disagree here with me. But Pakistan, am I audible right now? By the way, I think I'm having some.
थोड़ा सा अगर connectivity issue है, but you're audible, your video can start.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but your
Okay,
video.
sorry for that. Some network disruption. So I think a lot of people might disagree with me, but the solar transition is a climate finance success story because people do not understand what happened in the background. In 2015, the Energy Ministry deliberately set up the net metering policy because Pakistan does not have the money to bring in a revenue component to provide these subsidies. So net metering, in a way, is non-fiscal subsidy for you, and that is how we reached to this point. But for solar net metering to be considered as creating this ecosystem, there's an older story, which is the CDM, which is a Clean Development Mechanism, which allowed Pakistan's very large industries, people like Maple Leaf Cement, DG Cement, to import these solar systems for the very first time at a very large scale. So you at least had importers looking into solar. So solar is a climate finance success story. It has gotten so successful that the government is now using money on it, and people are making money off it. So again, this is where we are at. China's example is often taken, but China put this massive subsidy on solar, which encouraged this addition of 20 gigawatts just in the month of May 2025. Now, this has been in the news headlines. Why was this happening? Because China's new budget was coming in, which was taking away the subsidy. So all these independent power producers had put in money already, and they decided that whatever happens, we will use the month of May to end all of these projects. So by the time June budget fiscal year end closes, we will no longer have this subsidy. We will not get money from the government. It will close down, which is what Pakistan is doing. But at the same time, Pakistan has recently announced this carbon levy. I think people might have heard about it. We still don't know how this levy is going to be used. But in an ideal scenario, the levy on fossil fuel products will go into a climate fund. It can generate up to what we're calculating can generate up to 30 to 40 billion rupees. And this fund should then be utilized both by public and private partners as much as it can be. And or it could be public-private partnerships because the government does not have the capacity to be executing projects. So I see this chunk of money being utilized for projects in the future. We do have examples in the past. For example, the NDRMF, which is the National Disaster Management Fund, it provided money to private enterprises. Khan Fund took money and has deployed a bunch of projects in KP and GB for climate resilience. Similarly, you have other projects happening in Punjab and Balochistan. So this is how the government uses. But at the same time, now where will other climate finance opportunities come in? So again, I do not see subsidies coming in for the EV sector, not massive subsidies. The government has already reduced certain tariffs, but you will see other measures similar to net metering, relaxation of emission checks. Of course, there will be no emission checks on EVs. So automatically running a Toyota Corolla 5 years from now will be costly because you will be paying your duty every year, but you'll also be paying for the emissions that it is producing. You'll paying the government for the emission checks every year. So you'll automatically think, why not buy EV in this regard? So if there's an entrepreneur that has produced a locally manufactured car by then, they have a huge opportunity. At the same time, you will see banking sector. So I was just going through Bloomberg. In the MENA, Africa, South Asia region, there are 12,000 listed bonds right now that you can invest money in it. From that 12,000, only UAE, India, and South Africa are countries which have listed green bonds, and their banking and private sector has listed green bonds. Why have they listed it? Because they know that they're not getting immediate capital from anyone. So what they will do, they'll get some money through green bonds, they'll get some money through financial assistance, they'll blend that. Now, Pakistani banks need to do something in this regard. They need to come up with green financing instruments which are funded by internationally linked bonds, and then they can obviously merge them with grants and other financing. So this is a big pool of climate finance that Pakistani financial institutions are not tapping yet. And I think that this is an opportunity that should be used. This could be an easily inflow of $1 to $2 billion per annum into Pakistan. So this is something that can happen. At the same time, I do see that entrepreneurial access to these funds is limited right now. People still think of grants as the first case. Now USAID isn't there. Other governments are, taking their funding away. So the ideal scenario here is that we will eventually link ourselves with banking institutions and governments, which is where entrepreneurs should be focused in creating their pitches for these sort of audiences. Audiences in front of banks, in front of government funds, in front of credit guarantee companies. All of these sort of institutions will support the financing environment.
And just so kind of, everyone's aware, Dawar ने chat में कुछ 7 सवालों का आंसर दिया है इस statement में. He's touched on the bond possibility that someone asked. He's touched on, the good Pakistani success story. He's talked about the lack of liquidity for young entrepreneurs right now. He's touched on EVs as a policy driver, and he's also talked about de-risking capital. And lastly, the tech bit of it. So I think hopefully हम कोशिश ही कर रहे हैं कि जितने लोग क्वेश्चंस पूछते हैं किसी ना किसी तरह सारों को ब्लेंड करके आंसर कर दूं. आई थिंक सिर्फ एक दो सवाल रह गए हैं जो मैं फिर से मिक्स कर रहा हूं. एंड इफ आई मिस्ड आउट ऑन एनीवन प्लीज फील फ्री टू सेंड इट ऑन द चैट अगेन. डॉक्टर बार एक दो क्वेश्चंस हैं जो मैं आपसे ही डायरेक्टली एंड में पूछ लेता हूं बिकॉज बहुत से क्वेश्चंस हैं जो हम इनिशियली कवर कर चुके हैं. सो आई एम नॉट गोइंग टू रिपीट देम. एक तो बात हो रही है research centered for people who are looking to take possibly a career path similar to yours. How do they kind of embark on that, and what are the metrics of success in it? And lastly उसमें मैं जरा fix कर रहा हूँ जबरदस्ती एक बात कि इधर कुछ sustainable food systems और agriculture और tech की बात हो रही है. उन दोनों elements को अगर आप touch कर सकें तो I think we're pretty much good for now.
Okay, so I'll start with sustainable food system very quickly. Look, I've been doing, and I'm happy to share, later ideas on, on how do we look at a systemic approach, right? Within Oxford also, we work a lot on systems thinking, food system, right? अब देखिए मेन जो ऑब्जेक्टिव है व्हेन यू लुकिंग एट फूड सिस्टम्स, जो मेन चीज हमें देखनी होती है वो हमें एक बड़ा क्लियरली एट अ कंट्री लेवल वी हैव टू एग्री ऑन व्हाट are the outcomes that we're focusing on, right? So they can be very different outcomes, right? One outcome of a food system is कि we want to have nutrition. एक और आउटकम हमारा होता है कि नहीं जी हमें क्वांटिटी चाहिए, वी वांट लॉट्स ऑफ फूड. तो इश्यूज हमें इसलिए आ रहे होते हैं फूड सिस्टम के अंदर बिकॉज हमारी इस पॉलिसी के अंदर देयर इज नो कंसेंसस. वन पार्ट इज सेइंग नो लेट्स प्रोड्यूस मोर एंड मोर, वी वांट मोर. सो व्हाट डू वी सी सो मच मोनोक्रॉपिंग. पाकिस्तान में majority monocropping, right? So you've got like 3-4 agriculture crops that focus, right? उससे क्या हो रहा है? Of course, we have other crops that suffer, right? Cotton, अगर हम देखा जाए cash crop है, it's not a food crop. So how does that compete, right? Sugarcane has its own challenges, very, very water intensive crop, how do you balance that? कि जी हम एक तरफ हमें sugar चाहिए, दूसरी तरफ हमारे water use हो रहा है. तो I think what this requires is a clear understanding कि हमारे objectives क्या हैं.
Yeah.
Solutions बहुत available हैं. You can go and have tons and tons of climate smart solutions. लेकिन अगर वो objective के साथ match नहीं कर रहे तो solutions are not necessary. So I think that's what we need to think about कि let's have clear outcomes. And that can be built on a consensus. Once we have clear outcomes, then policy and funding and everything aligns. Right now, it's all over the place. आज ये crop उगाया, कल कोई और crop उगाया, country में 50% cotton गिर गई है, कभी कोई चीज ऊपर जा रही है. We don't know what's happening. Farmers are and they suffer because of that. So I think that's it. Consistency, outcome-based approach. जहां तक देखो एजुकेशन और रिसर्च की बात है, look, बहुत से pathways हैं of kind of building your career, right? But I think what's really needed in Pakistan is कि we have to build a research mindset. When I say a research mindset, इसका ये मतलब है कि let's not jump to conclusions. हम बहुत solution oriented होते हैं, which is fine. We have to be solution oriented. But I think we need to understand what are the underlying challenges. हमारा system क्यों operate कर रहा है the way it's operating, right?
Yeah.
हम हमेशा बात करते हैं corruption की. Yes, but why are other things, as Dawar saying, why did solar succeed? Why, despite corruption?
Yeah.
कुछ चीजों को आप कंट्रोल नहीं कर सकते जब उनकी नीड आ जाती है. So
Yeah.
I would say, look, if you're sitting in Pakistan, Absolutely. Research mindset is very important. We need that. Local universities are great. But then you can start to collaborate, right? Reach out to universities. There's a lot happening here. बहुत सी opportunities हैं. You don't have to necessarily go into a long-term PhD program. Many programs, shorter programs. Oxford runs a climate school program, which is free for people, right? So just be active, just plug yourself in these networks, and by plugging yourself in your networks, many opportunities will open up. So मैं ये कहूँगा, build your relationships. You're not alone. We're all thinking about the same problem, and that's the positive. हम सब सोच रहे हैं how to solve for this. And when a lot of more people think about it, we come up with innovation and ideas. And in this talk, we've heard so many ideas, so many solutions. So that's what I can recommend. And yeah.
Okay, no, thank
Because
you to both of you. Sorry.
I'd like to chip in here a little bit. I know we're running off time, but very short comment. I 100% agree with Dr. Abrar on collaboration and relationship building. And this is something that we all three of us, and also people we interact with, learn. The simplest example is the way I do this work around air quality. When I was graduating in 2016, that is when I started it as like a activism kind of thing. I'll research, I'll come up with a data-centric report, and I'll do something about it. Then I thought about building local air purifiers. I realized that I alone can do this, so let's not get into this. But after 9 years of that, gradually building relationships, finding people who are interested in this work, through that process, we were able to raise financing for setting up Pakistan's first air quality lab. And it took 9 years, building relationships meanwhile, doing everything. And again, it's a mix of blended finance. We got Bank Alphala to support us, and also a grant from the US to merge both things and do this, which
Yeah.
is, again, what I'll recommend. Don't think of big things. Relationships, research, make sure your idea is 100% soundproof. No one can poke holes in it. The business that we're generating is a quality data, which World Bank wants to buy, which ADB wants to buy, which international institutions will want to buy or collaborate with by bringing in additional resources. So this is, in a nutshell, what you can do. You need relationships, you need to collaborate, you need to have an idea, reach out to people and share that idea. Don't just sit on it. Because other
Yeah.
people might have the same idea, they might have a better idea, or they might even steal your idea. But at the same time, someone stealing your idea and them succeeding and failing with that idea will also make sure that that at least your idea got validated in a way. So
Yeah.
we see that happen with us as well, and we're happy to support anyone. And if anyone needs more advice and support, we're happy to share those ideas as well.
Just kind of closing off, I think echoing what Dawar said, I think all of us are very proactive in terms of talking to people, helping them out. So we want to be able to talk to anyone who requires any assistance. And kind of just closing off, thank you to Dawar and Dr. Abrar for such a fruitful session. I think बहुत सी चीजें बहुत ज़्यादा in depth में आपने समझाई हैं बहुत आसानी से. So I hope the audience enjoyed, because we did have a very stable, good uptake of people till about 8 p.m. Anyway, Ali, I'll kind of hand over to you now, if that's okay.
No, I think that's great. Thank you so much for joining.
Okay,
Thank you so
likewise.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Mekaeel.
Thank you, everyone.